The Italian Wine Podcast is introducing a new donation drive this month. It's called Why Am I a Fan? We are encouraging anyone who tunes in on a regular basis to send us your 10-second video on why you are a fan of our podcast network or a specific show. We will then share your thoughts with the world with the goal of garnering support for our donation drive. Italian Wine Podcast is a publicly funded, sponsor-driven enterprise that needs you in order to continue to receive awesome free wine edutainment 7 days a week. We are asking our listeners to donate to the Italian Wine Podcast by clicking either the GoFundMe link or the Patreon link found on ItalianWinePodcast.com. Remember, if you sign up as a monthly donor on our Patreon, we will send you a free IWP t-shirt and a copy of the Wine Democracy book, the newest Mama Jumbo Shrimp publication.
Thanks for tuning in to Get U.S. Market Ready with Italian Wine People on the Italian Wine Podcast. I'm Steve Raye, your host, and this podcast features interviews with the people actually making a difference in the Italian wine market in America, their experiences, challenges, and personal stories. And I'll be adding a practical focus to the conversation based on my 30 years in the business. So if you're interested in not just learning how, but also how else, then this pod is for you. Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Get U.S. Market Ready with Italian Wine People. I'm Steve Raye, your host, and I'd like to introduce you this week to Chris Scott, who's host of the UK Wine Show. Chris, welcome to the show.
G'day, mate. Not too bad. And yourself, Steve?
I'm doing great. Bright and early for us, and it's afternoon for you. I first met you when you interviewed me for a podcast, and I knew nothing about podcasts at the time. 2 years ago, maybe 3, I think, at Wine to Wine, that event that Stevie Kim puts on in Verona every year. And in fact, we both are going to be there this year. We met a couple of years ago, and you interviewed me. And I remembered it was really only the second time I'd ever been interviewed for a podcast. And I felt really nervous. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know how it would be used. I didn't know how it would be impact me. 2 years later, you're a guest on my show. I think that's pretty interesting. Did you have a comment on that?
No, but it just speaks to the volume that it is easy to do a podcast. And, once people start to get into it, they realize that it's a great platform, I suppose. So for you to go from a zero to a hero in less than a year is pretty good going.
Yeah. I don't know if I would call it a hero, but the listener stats are pretty significant. So, and I do get a lot of people coming up to me and saying that they listen to me, which is certainly personally rewarding. Okay. Well, give us a little background on you and you in the wine industry, particularly, and the UK Wine Show and some of the other things that you're doing.
Okay. So I got into wine. I like wine. Don't get me wrong. I've always liked wine. Me and my wife, before we got to the wine trade, we used to go on holiday. We'd choose our holidays based on what wine region we want to go and visit. I've always been an enthusiastic amateur, but it was never really meant to be a job for me. I'm an engineer, electrical engineer. I studied engineering. I quite like it. High voltage power systems, electricity markets. Not that in the UK the electricity market's doing too well at the moment, but all that type of thing. And I really like that. I like solving problems. I'm a problem solver. But we wanted to start our own business, and we looked at everything you could possibly think of. Everything from, bikini waxing bars to Subway sandwich franchises, everything. And we were trying to work out a business that we could get into. And there was like, I could go down engineering. Jane's going, I could go down marketing. And, we just couldn't come up with anything. There was too many opportunities. When you first start out, the world's your oyster and you can do what you like. So we needed to narrow it down. And we were on holiday in Canada, Quebec. A friend of ours was getting married in Quebec. And after her marriage, we went to Niagara Falls, as we do. That's what we would do. We'd go to a wine region. And I was sitting in a Skillins vineyard.
Yeah.
In a Skillin, they're a fairly famous one, drinking some of their Vital Ice wine. And I had this moment of clarity, if you can think about that after a few glasses of wine. And it was, you know what? I need to get paid to drink wine. So we went, okay, we're going to join the wine trade. And then we came back and we looked at the industry because we said, okay, we've narrowed it down to a sector now. We need to learn about the sector and we need to identify where we can make a difference. So we went off and did some WSET courses, level 2 and 3, and we started looking at the different makeup of the UK wine sector. And at the time, it was actually quite tricky, because if you were like wholesale, everybody goes, "Oh, I want to buy wine." So they all, you see a lot of people do this, and they'll go, "Oh, I'm going to buy some wine." So they'll buy a truckload of wine, and then the next step is they've got to sell the stuff. And buying wine is really easy. It's the flogging that's the hard bit. And we looked at things like becoming a wholesaler or moving into that market segment, but it seemed that you had to fund every restaurant's balance sheet for quite some period of time before you could even think about getting a return. And the cash required was so vast to do it well. We just didn't have the money. And it was our first business, so I always fully expected us to fail. 9 out of 10 businesses failed in the first few years. So we were like, okay, this is going to be our learning business, so to speak. So we'll start it, and hopefully we'll learn some good skills, and we won't lose too much money when it goes wrong, because we didn't really have much. But I certainly didn't have much business now at that point anyway. So in the end, we looked at it and we went, okay, we need a low cost entry business that'll get us underway, that we can generate some cash reasonably quickly. And so we looked at it and we went, okay, we're going to do wine tasting. At the time, there was no one doing home wine tasting, going to people's houses or anything like that. So we said, okay, let's target that market segment, and we'll start there. So that's where we started. 3050 became a home wine tasting. After a while, we expanded into corporate events, and then we expanded into WST events. Now we do every type of wine tasting you could possibly imagine. If it involves booze, I'm into it.
At homes this is, or do you do like corporate events where there's like, 60, 80 people in an event or something?
Yeah. On Friday, I was doing a big corporate event at a very flash hotel for 100 people. We'd still do things at people's homes. There's a definite market segment for that. I'd say we probably do more. The value for us is in the corporate market rather than the home market. And we also do a fair bit of WCT material stuff as well. So that's all very good.
So that's how you make money.
That's that. Yeah, mainly that's the way.
So now let's turn the question to now the podcast, which is not a moneymaker. Talk about that.
Well, yes and no. So we started podcasting in 2006, which makes me the world's first wine podcaster. There was great radio, but I bet them to the punch by about 6 months, and I don't think they're still broadcasting now, but they were the first in America, and I was the first in the world. So, that was quite early days, and I remember talking to my guests at the time, going, podcast, it's a bit like radio. And, you spend the first 20 minutes just explaining what podcasting is. Yeah, it's weird.
Well, there is that whole theater of the mind thing that differentiates radio from television, that it's only sound, and you kind of deduce the personality of who you're listening to based on, volume, resonance, all that kind of stuff, the tonality and all that kind of stuff. So it leaves a lot for engagement of the listener without being part of the conversation, don't you think?
Yeah, you definitely listen to the person. I was at a tasting on Friday, as I was saying, and one of the guys I was talking to there had an absolutely gorgeous voice. It was, and you become acutely aware of it, possibly more through podcasting than I normally would have maybe 20 years ago before I started this role. So, you can definitely enjoy other people's voices now a lot more, perhaps.
So, but what we were talking about was you had laughed when I said the non-money making side of it. So jump back to that.
Okay, so because I've been going for so long, over the years, we've picked up all sorts of work through podcasting, not directly, mind you, but, people listen to the show or whatever, and you'll do a load of consultancy work here and there. Just because you've got a higher profile than a lot of people, people come to you for stuff, which is quite nice. But we were at that wine-to-wine conference a couple of years ago, I think it was, probably.
Before COVID, I think it was the year before COVID, so 2019 would be my guess.
Yeah. I've been to wine-to-wine a few times, and it might have been before I met you, actually. But I was on a panel talking about it and how to monetize podcasting, and I was like, do you know what, guys? I don't bother, and they go, how about audience attraction? I go, no, I don't care, I mean, I'm here. I always did podcasting because I wanted to do podcasting. I'm a technical guy, and this was a technological problem, and it gave me a voice that not many people at the time could do. And so I was quite keen on it. And also, for me, I like to learn. We've all got our buzzers, and mine is I like to learn. And I found after I'd finished a 2-year diploma, well, it took me a little bit longer than 2 years, but we'll call it a 2-year diploma, I stopped learning. And it was like, well, how can I learn? Well, I need to be able to talk to the really smart people, trap them in a room for an hour, and ask them anything I want. How can I do that? Oh.
Italian Wine Podcast, part of the Mama Jumbo Shrimp family.
How cool is that, right? Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely align with that. That's really great. I've never articulated it that way, but that's really the joy of it.
Yeah, I love that type of thing. And just, I ask people all sorts of strange questions because, I don't really have an agenda other than I'm trying to learn something for myself. And if people want to come along on the journey, I'm more than happy to share that journey. But, we've got patrons who pay us and things like that. So we get money from the podcast itself. And I'll listen to what they say. They've got some things they want, and I'll definitely cover it for those listeners. That's not a problem. But I'm always thinking about what do I want to learn or what can I do for me? And then everything else falls out from that. So I don't care too much about numbers. People go on about numbers. I'm not worried about it. We've got pretty good numbers, but I'm not. To be honest, I haven't looked at them for a year. I really don't care.
It's not going to make a difference, right? It's not going to change what you're doing. Yeah.
No, we're not trying to sell advertising. We have people who ask us if we want to advertise, and we'll go, yeah, if you want to, but we're not chasing anybody. We're not trying to, and we've never really bothered with it too much. What we do, though, is because we've got that platform, it's tied really nicely with our WSET, because our normal punter at our home tastings or our corporate events aren't necessarily the fully engaged type of person. My show's a little bit geeky at times. I'm quite happy hammering something quite hard, and we do geek out. So it's not always perfect for the casual wine drinker. It's more for the engaged enthusiast or someone in the trade. To be honest, you listen to my show because you want to learn stuff about wine. You don't listen to it because you're trying to fill in half an hour of light entertainment. And so it doesn't really tie up with our key 30/50 product range. But what we found was students doing WCT, it was right on their button. So after, I think it was the first time I was at Wine to Wine, and they said, how do you make money out of it? And I said, well, I don't really. I thought about it. I thought, you know what? I need to do something about this. We've got a platform. We've got a good situation. So let's do it. So that was about the same time as we started creating a load of WSCT products. So these are things like flashcards, exams, tasting guides, all sorts of materials that we create. We sell internationally. We have a load of American buyers for our product. It's one of our big markets. And we started pushing our products through the show. And we sell, we sell good margin on those products. And WCT, that higher end education side of things, dovetails quite nicely with the show. And now we ask, people who do our courses, our level 2 and our level 3, how they heard about us. And it's probably only about 10 or 15% of people, but they listen to the show, and that's why they chose us. And that's a nice bit of revenue because you make good money out of a WSC course. So, well, you can. We do monetize it quite well now, but still not directly. We'd never sell advertising or anything like that.
Well, I can go down that rabbit hole, coming from an ad agency, owning one myself, but I won't. I think, where are your listeners? Obviously, the title of the show is UK Wine Show. Are they predominantly UK, or what percentage are they in, and what other countries you would reference to that?
Okay, so roughly, I think it's about 50% US, maybe 55. I haven't looked at it for a while, but it's predominantly US, and that's partly because there's a lot of engaged people in the US. Also, it's a much bigger country in terms of population, so the US is number one. UK is number two. We're probably about 35% of listeners, maybe slightly higher, come from the UK. We've got listeners in Australia, Japan, strangely enough. We were the number one wine show in China at one point.
Not going to do you much good these days, but especially if you're Australian wines. But yeah.
So, But that was still on small listenership. I don't think they had many English wine shows at that point running.
Well, actually, this one is the Italian Wine Podcast is broadcast on Himalaya. I don't know how to pronounce it, but also on what other ones are you carried on? I presume SoundCloud, Stitcher.
Yeah, and not SoundCloud probably. I can't remember if we are now or not. Definitely Stitcher, Spotify, all the normal sort of streaming services. I don't think we're on Prime. Amazon Prime, but I'm not sure about that. I haven't looked for a while.
Well, when I'm listening to you talk and thinking about the compare and contrast to what we're doing, and the interesting thing is, at least on mine, it's about 65% US, probably another 20% UK, then like 10% Italy, and then, resolves to some other things. So I think we're probably talking to similar audiences, although obviously the subject matter is a little bit different. So if people did want to find your show, how would they go and listen to it?
You can probably the easiest way is just type in UK wine show into Google and it will come up pretty well. If you go into any of the podcasting apps or anything like that, it will come up. No, it's pretty easy to find. And if you get desperate, I had a person contact me. I don't believe people like this existed anymore, but he said he wanted to subscribe to the show. So I sent him sort of the RSS feeds and a guide to how to do it. And he wrote back saying, "Oh, I can't." I said, "Yeah, just do it on your phone. It'll be fine." He goes, "No, I do everything on my Mac. 99% of my Mac. I need it. I can't listen to your show because I can't do it on a Mac." And I'm like, for goodness sake, 2006, there was no such thing as this phone. You had to do it on your computer. So it's like, oh God. So yeah, but you can get it anywhere.
Tell us a little bit about 3050 and what's the origin of the name of the company?
Well, in the old days, I used to do a little joke saying it's because I look 30 and my wife looks 50. However, she got...
Really? How many times did you say that?
enough. And when she was around as well, I'd get in the neck something chronic. It was hilarious. But now, sadly, both of us are over 50. So when we first started the business, it was 20 years ago, and we were both in our 30s. But it's a joke that's gone a little bit long now, I think. So originally, it's to do with latitudes where grapes grow. So most grapes grow between latitudes 30 and 50 degrees latitude. And I'm a big believer in the influence of climate on both the grape variety and the style of wines, and even the price points that those wines can achieve. So if you understand latitude, you've got a fairly good understanding of climate. Once you've got climate, you know what's going to be produced where and the sort of issues associated with those vineyard areas. And you're sort of 9/10 on the way to understanding what's going on. So I think it's a nice, cool name. And a lot of people in the wine trade don't know it, even though it's one of the first things you get taught when you're if you do a WST course. But it's a cool name, and it's very much my philosophy in terms of just saying like something very simple, but if you dig into it, there's a lot of content. That you could do.
You brought up an interesting subject. A friend of mine just published a book. His name is Brian Friedman. The name of the book is Crushed. It's got some really great reviews, and I just finished it. And the focus is on wonderful stories about how climate change is influencing the production of wines and challenging, not just in things getting hotter or more unpredictable, but the length of the growing season and all that kind of stuff in terms of grape ripeness and all that. What have you dug into that at all? Is that something you alluded to? Is that obviously a subject of interest?
Oh yeah, I think global warming is massive, important to us. I think people are overstating it a little bit in terms of the implications. I mean, if you're a wine region, you just do what Bordeaux did. All of a sudden the grapes are getting a little bit too ripe. So what do? They introduce Touriga Nacional as one of their grape varieties in AOC Bordeaux. So you're going to deal with it lots of ways. You can deal with it by just changing your grape mix, and these will take...
For those that are blends, that doesn't necessarily work so well in Chianti.
Yeah, but Chianti's a pretty big blend these days. It's Sangiovese dominated, but you can chuck in all sorts of stuff into that blend. Yeah, I mean, in regions where they've, like in Europe, where they've said you must be this grape variety and it's this, then obviously they'll have to change the rules. I mean, it's not like everybody goes on about the appellations, they're set in stone, but they're not. They're as flexible as the next business, the next pound you can make out of it. Do you know what I mean? These appellations are always changing their rules left, right, and centre, and they will. They'll continue, just like AOC Bordeaux introduced a load of great varieties.
Yeah, but that was very slow in coming, and I think that was one of Brian's points, is that the old European regulatory entities are a lot, in contrast to what you said, slower to adapt than the climate is actually changing. And that's a challenge.
They're slow to adapt until they see the money on the wall, and then they'll adapt very quickly. They will change. You can do all sorts of stuff. You can just check, instead of going a north-south alignment on your grape varieties, you can just put yourself at a slight angle, and all of a sudden the amount of UV light your grapes get radically changes by replanting. You can still do that. You can plant in areas that are not south-facing but are north-facing, or vice versa. There's lots of things that people can do if they want to hold on to those grape varieties. They don't have to just leave them there and do what they've always done and just pick a few weeks earlier and a few weeks earlier and a few weeks earlier until you're getting green flavors and terrible wines.
Well, then you get them out of balance. I was talking to somebody the other day about Chile, and one of the areas that I had visited and I was very impressed by is the Casablanca Valley. I don't know if you've ever been there and know much about it. It was basically just pasture land, very close to the ocean. Global warming has impacted them significantly, but the thing that impacted them more than anything else is rabbits. The rabbits ravaged the vineyards, and so they basically left them or ripped them up. And many of those producers are moving to other parts, more extreme parts of Chile, further south towards Patagonia, further north to the Atacama Desert, which I find really intriguing. And if there is any one country that is going to be impacted by global warming because of its north-south orientation, it's Chile. But here's this region that 15 years ago didn't even exist. They built it up into something significant and had a global reputation for Sauvignon Blanc, approaching, not directionally where New Zealand is, and now it's being completely abandoned. I don't see that kind of thing happening in Europe.
I read a wee bit about Casablanca, and I thought it wasn't just the rabbits, but it was also water issues. They had some water issues, not just rabbit issues. So I'm not sure that, I only superficially know about that, about them moving out of the area.
Right, and I'm sure I'm not capturing it completely, but the idea is a radical decision was made. And I don't see that happening because you don't have the history in South America. Casablanca, they just discovered, is a good place. And yeah, they can choose the hillsides that they're on. But if you're in Bordeaux, you can't say, okay, I'm going to move over to another, or Burgundy, I'm going to turn over to a south-facing slope. There's about 8,000 people that own that vineyard. It'd be pretty hard to buy it or trade it or change it.
Yeah, but you've got places like Burgundy, they've got quite a while. They've got a few degrees in temperature, not before they have to get too desperate about, So what, you lose a little bit of typicity and it's a little bit riper and the wines taste a little bit better.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about target audience, and not necessarily so much in behavior, meaning whether they're geeky or not, but it seems very popular these days to talk about Gen Z, especially in the U.S., Gen Z and millennials, and with very different sets of values, different ways, they're digitally native, as Paul Mabray likes to say. And they look at the world differently and they consume information about wine differently. Are you adapting your podcast to address these audiences at all?
Not really, no. Sorry to say, we are not. As I say, I do what I want to do and I do it. That said, podcasting is the trendy thing at the moment. The fact that I'm sort of been going for 18 years and the rest of the world's caught up means that I'm nicely positioned for Gen Z and millennials. But they're just coming on board now more than anything else.
Well, okay, speculate, if you will, then about Gen Z and millennials and how they find out about wine. You talk to a lot of people, you see all that kind of stuff. And in respect to podcasting is what I'm really talking about here.
Okay. So from all the conferences I go to, and they sort of say, where do they get the information from? It's usually associated, they get the information from friends or family or social media. So they're not necessarily getting information from authoritative voices, or historically from where a lot of people used to get their information was from some sort of authoritative voice. And that's why you've seen the rise of some of those ratings apps and all that sort of thing, where you get a lot of people saying, oh, I like this wine or I don't like this wine. The problem that you get with that is that the thing with wine is that some people love a certain wine, some people will hate exactly the same wine. And if you go for a crowd effect, which is where Gen Z are getting a lot of their information from, what you land up with is some mashed up middle ground. I was talking to the guy who did Vivino, and they're talking about their ratings a few years ago. And I was like, I bet your average score is something like 4.3. And it was 4.3 something or other. Do you know what I mean? Because whenever we've done analysis on ratings,
Right. Yeah.
because especially those polar wines where some people hate it and some people love it, it all still lands up with about the same number. So the problem you get is you get people gravitating to the same styles of wine, and you get the people who might really like high acid Chablis, and some people really can't stand high acid wines, and they're going to miss out on that opportunity. So I do think the problem you get with a lot of crowdsourced information is you land up with averages, and you do get the opportunity for people to say, I really like this, but then it's really hard to know whether you will like that just because someone else really likes it. Wine's one of those things where there's so many different styles out there, and some people really don't like certain styles, and some people really like certain styles. And if you take your information from friends, they might like a particular style. And if you listen to them enough, eventually you'll start liking that style, because we are plastic in our taste preferences. But
we see that in the U.S. A friend of mine once said, the only thing that happens when you're in the middle of the road is you get run over by a truck. I think that is kind of a nice metaphor. And a lot of the people that you talk to, and certainly the wine that I personally like and drink and experience when I travel around the world, are not the outliers, but not in the middle, not the mainstream Napa Cabernets, and I don't know much about the U.S. market, but things like, in Italy, everything from Grillo to Sagrantino de Montefalco to Vermentino. I drink a lot of Sangiovese, but a lot of variants on Sangiovese, like Montepulciano, Vino Nobile de Montepulciano, and so forth. So there's a lot to discover within even the traditional areas and people doing things differently. Do you think that can be a commercial success for marketers in the U.S. to do things differently?
Well, it comes down to how they're going to reach their product to market. And one of the problems you get with Italy is that there's a lot of small producers, and quite often you need to have some sort of volume to do. I did a really interesting podcast actually a couple of weeks ago about why some wines are popular and some wines are not so popular. And the first thing that came up was you've got to have volume. If you want to be a popular wine, you need to be able to quench the thirst of a lot of people. And if you can't quench that thirst, you're not going to be popular.
Right.
And the problem with Italy is there's a lot of really small regions where they're going to, Pinot Grigio can, but that's about it in terms of a lot of the sort of regions. It's really hard to get that volume there to be able to quench that thirst if it does become popular. And the problem with that is that you also, to get a large population of people liking your wine, you normally go for that middle road as well,
right.
Which is a little bit
said.
disappointing. And the great thing about Italian wines is, the Italians love tannins. They're into that sort of thing. And if you like tannins, Italy is a fabulous place to go visiting for red wines. But not everybody does. About a third of the population can't stand them. They've got almost a negative to them. And if you take all your advice from someone else who doesn't like tannins, then you're never going to be able to engage with them. And tannins are those.
Yeah, and I think you hit on a really important point. In the U.S., scores are counted because it's a language that everybody understands, even though it's not a very accurate language. And it's just a score of someone's, however that evaluation entity is structured, scoring. It may be measuring quality, but people interpret it as, oh, I would like that because it had a 92. But it's very possible that if it's a highly tannic wine and you don't like tannic wines, or it's a low acid wine and you prefer high acid wines with your food, you're not going to agree with that. I don't want to go off on the tangent of scores, but coming back to marketers, how can brands use podcasting as marketing or communications tools? And if you could distinguish between the two, marketing and communications tools.
Okay, so marketing's pretty straightforward. You can just take an ad. You can reach an audience. And the nice thing about podcasting is they do have quite specific markets that they're targeting. Getting information out of them from the podcaster about who their demographic is might be a bit tricky, but there's certain markets for it. So you can approach it from an advertising point of view. Most podcasters will rip your hand off to take advertising. In terms of
Except you and me, I
yeah,
think.
I just don't care. But the other thing is getting your message across on a podcast isn't that hard because podcasters need to produce content. They're all done on a shoestring, so they're always looking for content, especially content that is easy for them. Because I have to do my entire show in one day from start to scratch. It's a day, and that includes writing news articles and recording the interview and everything. Otherwise, if it goes over a day, I've lost too much time to be able to invest in it. So people who are competent, who can speak well on a topic, and they have a hook, they can get on shows and they can then use that as an opportunity to spread their word. And it's much more powerful than you'll ever get with an ad. Anyway, I switch off as soon as I hear ads. I go out of my way not to listen to ads. If there's a service that doesn't have an ad or a service that's ad supported, I'll always go for the one that doesn't have an ad. I don't like ads. I know in America you get them thrown down your throat, but I avoid them like the plague. So content is a great way of reaching the audience, and it's much more natural, and it's more likely to be lasting as well.
I think so too. It's the case of the hundreds or the true audience. There's a very small audience of a very small number of the true audience that you want to reach who are influential to others. And I'm not talking about orchestrating a whole viral marketing thing. I've said many times, viral is an outcome, not a strategy. But if you talk to the true believers, they become the evangelists to carry your word, perhaps even more so now than there are publications out there, whether we're talking about print, electronic, broadcast, or things like podcasts. So let's move a little further down the road. And where do you see, you've been in it since 2006, one of the founders of it, where do you see podcasting going in the next, say, I'm calling them kind of sort of post-COVID years? I mean, we're going to live with this forever, but with the growth of TikTok Reels and other video-based social tools, why is podcasting so vibrant today when it's only theater of the mind? And where's it going?
Okay, so it's got something over video that you can't have. And that is, you can listen to a podcast when you're driving, you're running, you're walking. You can do content or entertainment anytime you want, doing another activity. So anytime you've got a mental downtime, that's an opportunity for a podcast. Whereas TikTok, you have to be a lot more active, involved, and engaged in searching for the content than if you're on a podcast. So it's a different market. And also, if you like, for me, I go for runs. I can just switch off from the run and into the podcast, and I'm absorbed by it while I'm doing something, and it's fabulous. It's great. So it's definitely got its own place. I think the future of podcasting is, I think when things like Spotify came in, they were quite important because all of a sudden they started creating a gatekeeper approach. Remember when Spotify first came in, they wouldn't let anybody, it wasn't just anybody they would let on their platform. They were doing, for us, we spent ages getting on the Spotify platform. It was an absolute pain in the neck because they were like, no, you must go through a media partner to contact us and all this stuff. And we do everything ourselves. I wrote the RSS feed builder and everything, so we never had a media partner do it, so we couldn't get on it for a long time. But what you're going to see is you're going to see more networks of podcasts appearing. So Twit is a great technological network for podcasting, but there are other
TWIT?
Yeah, TWID, Twit. Yeah, Leo Laporte. He's a computer geek, but he's got a massive network of podcasts. He makes a brilliant living out of running huge numbers of podcasts. I mean, they're producing 2 or 3 podcasts a day, sort of thing, and it's a fabulous network. So you're going to get this consolidation into networks. You're going to see a lot of more marketing advertisement becoming available and funneled through it. So when I first started, I remember trying to get advertising on the show probably 10, 15 years ago. There just wasn't infrastructure in place for it. Now there's a lot of infrastructure, And I think that infrastructure will get more sophisticated and the ability to target the audience will become better. That's a key part that podcasters may be lacking, is the ability to actually communicate the numbers and explain what the demographics are. That will get slicker. And also the shows are getting much slicker. Poor old me and Jane, we're still me and Jane doing our podcast. A little bit of jingles and that, but some of these podcasts are very, very slick. And you're seeing people who've gone through media training now producing podcasts. So the quality of the shows is becoming much, much better. I'm going to rely on content from my audience rather than cool jingles. But there's a lot of really good content being developed, and the quality of that content is improving.
Good. So there's a future there. That's nice to know.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's brilliant. And radio's dead. I wouldn't want to be in radio. Radio's dying. Podcast is killing radio. They say TV killed the radio. No, podcast is going to kill radio.
I don't even know if radio is relevant to kids these days and whether they even listen to it.
That's what I mean. Exactly.
So we're coming to the end of our time. One of the things that I like to do at the end of my podcast is ask the guest for what's the big takeaway. Kind of think about what we've been talking about here, but remember that people are only going to take away one, maybe two or three, but I like to focus on just one thought. What can people listening, assuming that they're most in the trade, take away from this and put to work immediately? Is there a practical thing that we talked about that somebody can say, oh, I heard this on a podcast today and I'm going to do that?
In what aspect of it? We chatted a lot about all sorts of things.
Well, yeah, really what I'm asking is for you to just kind of pick one that particularly resonated with you.
Okay, so when we were talking about climate change, and I said, look, don't get as stressed as most people are about it. Don't get me wrong, I'm a big believer in climate change. I'm not a climate denier in any way, shape, or form. I've just spent a fortune on insulating my home or an office and doing, I'm absolutely 100% trying to do my bit in this thing. Agriculture as a sector is always under pressure. Wine is an agricultural product. However, the bands, as climate change happens, where things happen will change, but places like the UK will become more profitable for wine production, but places that are hot and on the marginal end are hot, like parts of the central parts of Australia, which are getting drier perhaps, there may become less profitable. And all you're going to see is things will move. And as they move, you'll still have the same range of styles. The styles will just come from different places because, as we said, Burgundy, their wines will start becoming riper. They might move from the whites might move from a stone fruit to a pineapple flavor profile, but the still wines will be excellent. So you'll see things change, but the wine's still going to be there. People will adapt to it. So I'm not worried about the wine industry globally. I'm worried about certain parts of the certain wine regions that have got particular issues that might make them less profitable. But I think overall, the wine industry is not necessarily going to be a bad place for global warming. And people get really worried about it. It's like the UK is doing everything they can to try and mitigate. Well, they were until we got a new government anyway. But we was doing quite a bit to try and mitigate global warming with its zero carbon. The UK agriculture is going to be one of the big winners out of global warming. The numbers say its agricultural sector, especially Scotland, will become more productive. So things are going to change, and there's going to be losers for sure. Let's not back around, and there's going to be some big losers. There's also going to be some big winners as well. That's not to say we shouldn't try and do it, but and manage it. And I do as much as I can to do that. But sometimes people, they get a little bit hysterical about it, and they get overexcited about it. There's going to be losers. There's going to be winners. It's a disaster. We need to manage it. But the wine industry as a whole will still produce wine in 50 years' time.
There you go. Great. Okay. So we're talking this week with Chris Scott of the UK Wine Show. Chris, if people wanted to get in touch with you or listen to the show or contact you or find more about you, what's your email, phone, website? How can they reach you?
Yeah, after saying that about global warming, I'm not sure I want to give it out.
No crazies need respond. Yeah.
So it's Chris.Scott at 3050, ThirtyFifty, 3050, like in those wine regions, .co.uk. The podcast is UK Wine Show. It is definitely a good show if you want to engage and learn lots. If you're looking for light entertainment, it's probably not the show for you. And if you're studying WSET, we have the best range of products, flashcards, mock exams, levels 1, 2, and 3, and now diploma as well. So you can get all the study material you need from us as well.
Well, great. Well, now there's a perfect example of how to embed marketing content into it. But of course, we didn't make any money on it. So there's that. Anyway, this is Steve Raye on how to get U.S. market ready with Italian wine people on the Italian Wine Podcast channel, saying thank you for listening. Chris, thank you. It's a delightful conversation. I look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks or next month at Wine to Wine. And thank you for joining us. Thanks again for listening. This is Steve Raye with Get U.S. Market Ready with Italian Wine People on the Italian Wine Podcast.